Tonight, we slow down. We let the noise of the day fall away. The notifications, the deadlines, the endless rush of modern life. For the next 30 minutes, none of that exists. Tonight, we tell a story. A story that began not in a gleaming corporate tower, not in a Silicon Valley boardroom filled with suits and PowerPoint slides, but in a quiet moment of frustration. A very ordinary moment that changed the world in an extraordinary way. We travel back. All the way back to 1997. The world was a different place then. The internet was young, fragile, and slow. Dial-up modems screeched and hissed just to connect you to a page that took 3 minutes to load. People rented movies from physical stores. They drove to the video shop on a Friday evening, walked the aisles under fluorescent lights, picked up a plastic case, and hoped, truly hoped, that someone hadn't already taken the copy they wanted. And if you forgot to return it on time, you paid the price. Literally. That is where our story begins. A man named Reed Hastings had rented a VHS tape of Apollo 13. A classic film. Tense. Gripping. The story of 3 astronauts stranded in space, trying to make it home against impossible odds. There's some irony in that, because what happened next would put Reed Hastings on his own impossible journey. He forgot to return it. 6 weeks pass. And when he finally walked back into the store, he was handed a late fee. $40. $40. He paid it. But he didn't forget it. That small sting, that quiet embarrassment of handing over money for something so trivial, planted a seed. A question formed in his mind. Why does it have to be this way? Why do we drive to a store, fight for parking, browse cramped shelves, and then live in fear of a deadline? Why can't watching a movie be effortless? Around the same time, Reed met a man named Marc Randolph. Marc was a marketing expert with a restless mind and a hunger for disruption. The two of them began to talk. They would carpool together in the mornings, and on those long drives through California, they would dream out loud. They talked about what the future could look like. What if you could order a movie, and it came to you? What if there were no late fees? What if there were no deadlines at all? At the time, DVDs were a brand new technology. Small, lightweight, durable. And here was the key insight that changed everything. DVDs could be mailed. In a simple envelope. Through the ordinary postal service. To test the idea, they did something wonderfully simple. They put a CD into an envelope, wrote an address on it, walked to the nearest mailbox, and dropped it in. Then they waited. A few days later, the envelope arrived. The CD was intact. Not scratched. Not broken. Perfectly fine. That moment, that quiet, ordinary moment of opening a mailbox, was the beginning of a revolution. In 1997, Netflix was born. Not with a grand launch event. Not with banners and fanfare. Just a small office in Scotts Valley, California. A few desks. A few computers. A stack of red envelopes, and a dream. Let that settle for a moment. Every empire has a quiet beginning. Every skyscraper starts with a single brick. And Netflix, the company that would one day be worth hundreds of billions of dollars, started with a stamped envelope and a belief that movies deserve to be treated better. The early years were not glamorous. Building something new never is. Reed and Marc faced problems that no one had ever faced before, because no one had ever tried to do this before. How do you ship thousands of fragile discs across the country every single day without breaking them? How do you build a system that gets the right movie to the right person at the right time, using nothing but the postal service? These were not small problems. They were enormous. And they had to be solved one by one, quietly, without any guarantee of success. In the beginning, Netflix operated like a traditional rental service. You paid per movie. You ordered online. A red envelope arrived in your mailbox a day or two later. You watched your film. You sent it back. Simple enough. But the business was struggling. Revenues were thin. Customers liked the idea, but they weren't returning in the numbers Reed and Marc had hoped for. Something had to change. And in 1999, it did. Reed Hastings made a decision that would define Netflix forever. He scrapped the parental model entirely and introduced something radical. Something that most businesses at the time considered reckless. The subscription. For a flat monthly fee, you could rent as many movies as you wanted. Keep them as long as you liked. No late fees. No due dates. No anxiety. When you were done with a movie, you dropped it in the red envelope, put it in your mailbox, and the next one on your list was already on its way. It sounds obvious now. But in 1999, it was revolutionary. They weren't selling movies. They were selling peace of mind. They were selling the freedom to watch what you wanted, when you wanted, without the clock ticking against you. Customers responded. Slowly at first. Then steadily. The red envelopes began appearing in more and more mailboxes across America. The little company in Scotts Valley was growing. But growth costs money. And by the year 2000, Netflix was burning through it fast. The dot-com bubble had just burst. The entire technology sector was in freefall. Companies that had been worth billions were suddenly worth nothing. Investors were pulling back. Credit was drying up. And Netflix, still young, still fragile, was losing money every month. Reed Hastings made a decision. A painful one. He would approach Blockbuster, the giant of the video rental world, and offer to sell Netflix to them. The asking price was $50 million. Reed and Marc flew to Dallas. They walked into Blockbuster's headquarters. They sat across the table from the executives and made their pitch. The Blockbuster executives laughed. Not with them. At them. To Blockbuster, Netflix was a joke. A tiny mail-order company with no real assets, no real revenue, and no real future. Why would the king of video rental pay $50 million for something so insignificant? Reed and Marc left Dallas with nothing. No deal. No money. Just the long flight home and the quiet weight of rejection. But somewhere on that flight, something hardened in Reed Hastings. A quiet resolve. If Blockbuster wouldn't believe in them, they would simply have to prove the world wrong themselves. They returned to Scotts Valley. They went back to work. And they kept going. By 2003, something had shifted. For the first time in its history, Netflix posted a profit. A real profit. Not a projection. Not a hope. A profit. The red envelopes were everywhere. Millions of them. Traveling through the postal system every day like a quiet army, carrying entertainment directly into people's homes. Netflix had over 1 million subscribers. It had survived the dot-com crash. It had survived the rejection. It had survived the doubt. But Reed Hastings was already thinking about what came next. He had always known, deep down, that the mail was just a bridge. A brilliant bridge. A necessary bridge. But still, temporary. The real future, the future he had been quietly building toward, was something else entirely. The internet was getting faster. Broadband connections were spreading across America. And Reed Hastings began to see the possibility, not just the possibility, but the inevitability, of streaming. What if you didn't need the envelope at all? What if the movie came to you instantly? No waiting. No mailbox. No envelope. Just press a button and watch. In January 2007, Netflix launched a feature called Watch Now. It was modest at first. The library was small. Just a few hundred titles. The video quality was not what we would expect today. But the concept, the idea that you could open your laptop, click a button, and immediately begin watching a movie, was unlike anything most people had ever experienced. The world didn't fully understand yet what had just happened. But Reed Hastings did. He had just built a digital highway. And he was going to drive it all the way to the future. Over the next few years, streaming grew. Slowly. Then rapidly. Netflix began partnering with device manufacturers. Smart TVs, gaming consoles, Blu-ray players, phones, tablets. Anywhere there was a screen, Netflix wanted to be there. And all this time, Blockbuster was watching. But watching was all they did. Blockbuster had thousands of stores. Tens of thousands of employees. They were the undisputed king of video rental. And that very size, that very power, made it impossible for them to move quickly. They were a tanker trying to turn like a speedboat. By the time they understood what was happening, Netflix was already gone over the horizon. Then came the moment that changed everything. Again. In 2011, Netflix made an announcement that shocked the industry. They were not just going to stream other people's content. They were going to create their own original programming. Netflix Originals. The first major bet was a political drama called House of Cards, a big-budget series starring Kevin Spacey and directed by David Fincher. Netflix spent over $100 million on the first 2 seasons, before a single episode had aired. It was a gamble that made Hollywood nervous. Who is this DVD buy-mail company, thinking it could compete with HBO? With CBS? With NBC? But Netflix had something no TV network had ever had before: data. Netflix knew, with extraordinary precision, what its subscribers liked to watch, what genres they preferred, which actors they loved, how long they watched before turning something off, what time of day they sat down to stream. Every click, every pause, every rewind. Using all of that data, they didn't guess what people wanted to see. They knew. And they built House of Cards accordingly. When House of Cards launched in February 2013, all 13 episodes were released at once. No waiting week to week. No cliffhangers stretched over months. You could watch the entire season in one sitting, if you wanted. Binge watching had arrived. The world changed. The way we consume stories changed. Television would never be the same again. And Blockbuster, in 2010, filed for bankruptcy. The company that had laughed Reed Hastings out of their Dallas boardroom was gone. The laughter had stopped. The red envelope had won. Let us slow down now. We are in the final chapter of tonight's story. And like all good stories, the ending is not really an ending at all. It is simply a pause. A place to breathe. A moment to look back at how far we have come, before we look forward again. Today, Netflix is in over 190 countries. It has more than 260 million subscribers. It produces films and television series in dozens of languages. It has won Academy Awards. It has launched the careers of countless artists, writers, and directors. But more than any of that, Netflix changed something deeper. It changed the relationship between people and stories. For most of human history, stories were communal. You gathered around a fire. You sat in a theater. You watched the same show at the same time as everyone else in your country, and talked about it the next morning at work. Netflix changed that. It made storytelling personal, intimate. Your experience, your pace, your choices. Stories shaped around you, rather than you shaping yourself around stories. That is a profound shift. One that we are still adjusting to. And it all started with a $40 late fee. Think about that for a moment. $40. A small frustration. An ordinary evening. A man, annoyed at himself, handing over money he didn't want to spend, and instead of simply forgetting about it, he asked, "Why? Why does it have to work this way? Is there a better way? Could I build the better way?" That question, that simple, stubborn, beautiful question, is where every great thing in human history begins. Not in brilliance. Not in genius. Not in overnight inspiration. But in a quiet refusal to accept that the current way is the only way. Reed Hastings was rejected. He was laughed at. He nearly ran out of money. He made mistakes along the way, big ones. There were times when Netflix's future was genuinely uncertain. When the people around him doubted. When even he must have wondered if it was worth it. But he kept going. Quietly. Steadily. One red envelope at a time. There is something deeply comforting about that. Because most of us are not living dramatic lives. Most of us are not standing on stages or making headlines. Most of us are doing quiet, unglamorous work. Showing up. Trying. Failing a little. Getting up. Trying again. The story of Netflix is a reminder that that is enough. That quiet persistence, that refusal to give up on a good idea, is the most powerful force in the world. More powerful than money. More powerful than connections. More powerful than the laughter of those who cannot see what you see. Tonight, wherever you are, whatever you are carrying, I want you to hold that thought. You do not have to have all the answers. You do not have to have it all figured out. You just have to keep going. One step. One day. One red envelope at a time. And so, the story of Netflix comes to a rest. From a small office in California, to the screens of over 260 million homes around the world. From a $40 frustration to a cultural revolution. From two men in a carpool to an empire that changed how humanity tells its stories. Let the weight of the day dissolve now. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breathing slow. You have listened. You have traveled back through time. You have sat with the story of two quiet dreamers who refused to accept the world as it was. Now, rest. The screen fades. The light dims. The music softens into nothing. You are in the quiet world now. Good night.